Welcome to today's show. My name is Michael Juberg, and I'm with the Global Compassion Coalition, an online community with a mission to build a world based on compassion. Today, we have the privilege of speaking with Rachel Killam, an interdisciplinary education doctoral candidate at the University of South Florida. Rachel focuses on higher education administration, philosophy, and compassion. Her scholarly work through her doctoral program has focused on the philosophical, social, and political norms that shape higher education and education in general as a workplace. Thank you so much for joining us today, Rachel.
Thanks for having me, Michael. Excited to be here and chat with you all.
Really appreciate it. So, I'm so curious, tell us about your personal journey that led you into this work.
I would describe my work as coming at compassion from a different angle, like you mentioned in my introduction, as I'm looking at the philosophical, social, and political norms that make higher ed as a workplace or just workplaces in general unkind and not compassionate. So there's so much good work and good science around becoming compassionate people and developing capacities for compassionate interventions. But I think what the work needs is how are we looking at our systems that stifle that, even when we do our best work and try to be good humans. There are things at play that are bigger than us that can make that difficult. So that's kind of my bigger like approach to this is looking at this from a systemic perspective, because I think compassion is powerful and life changing. And how I got into it is, so I sort of have this background of sort of compassionate work. So for 5 years, when I first got out of college, I was a youth and young adults pastor. So I was working with middle school, high school, and young adult people. And really what I loved about that work was helping them kind of live the life they wanted. I'm always like, don't ask, this is a quote a lot of people have heard, but don't ask yourself what the world needs. Ask yourself what makes you come alive and do it. And that helps other people come alive. So, because what the world needs is people who have come alive. So I did that work, but in that is really like where sort of my compassionate roots began as far as my professional identity. Long story short, maybe another podcast. I evolved away from that work and away from my faith system, and I evolved into getting a master's in mental health counseling. So again, another leap toward a compassionate field. And in that space, through internships and through coursework, I was really drawn to career counseling because I thought, what a great place to work with people and identity is we work most of our lives, right? And most of our days. And so why not do work that is aligned with who we are and what brings us alive? And so that's where I kind of fell in love with this career counseling work in that time. So I've been doing this for 17 years. I've been in higher ed. I've worked at a couple different universities as a career counselor for 17 years, which is kind of the lead up to how I got to be talking to you today. Is I know I had two sort of um, catalysts for this work. One is I've met with thousands of students over the years. I love meeting with students. And over time, I started noticing a pattern that I'd be in a, hour-long session with a student. We'd get to know each other. And right like 5 minutes before the session ended, they had been talking to me all about what they want to do, how they want to kind of shape their life. But then they'd end the session with, you know what, Rachel, you know what I really want that I haven't said, and I feel stupid saying this out loud, and then they say the thing that's their true desire, but they felt impeded or like what they want is not good enough or won't make money or won't be it's not as normal in society. And honestly, some of the stuff wasn't that outrageous. It was just that they had a perception that what they wanted to do was not good enough. So over time, I was like, "Why?" And they're, between 18 and 21 typically, and I'm like, "Why am I the first person they feel like they could say this to?" Like, they would say, "I've never said this out loud. I've never said this to anybody." And so I started having this just general maybe frustration with sort of our cultural myths around career and what counts and doesn't count, and why is it unsafe for people to say what they want in life? So that was part 1. Part 2 is also working in higher education for 17 years and working with lots of different people and different subcultures within universities. I started recognizing that suffering was normal. I call it there's a normalized suffering in working in higher education. People being overworked, underpaid, valued, decision making that really stifles people. So even people that are kind and compassionate, it's higher ed, right? are having a hard time being kind to each other and being at least civil and respectful in their interactions. So I became an unofficial sounding board for people to work through tough interpersonal or systemic decision making scenarios. And again, that's where I was like, what is this? Like, we're higher education. I think we have the potential to be healing and emancipatory force in the world, but we're kind of mean to each other. And so that's when I started, long story short, started Googling PhDs in compassion, more out of like frustration. Like, how can I do more work and contribute more to making higher education a kind and compassionate place to work? And that's how I came to interdisciplinary education. And long story short, how I learned that as I started studying compassion, like I was saying earlier, there's so much good work around that we are hardwired for compassion. We can build our capacities for compassion. So if this is the case and if this is true, why aren't we living this out systemically in our higher ed workplaces? And that's where I stumbled upon neoliberal capitalism, and I'm like, okay, we are part of cultural norms, of work norms that are inherently unkind. And so to be kind in those spaces can sometimes be seen as weakness or a liability or foolish or against common sense. So that's the thumbnail sketch. So
Wonderful.
far, so
Yeah.
good.
So far, very good. Yeah, that's interesting. We'll have some chance to break down those 2 points. But on that second point, you're kind of talking about neoliberalism and how it doesn't necessarily benefit the kind. I do think what comes to mind for me is that a lot of academia and the students and the people who are in it work in an effort towards self-preservation, which is
Yes.
anything but what education is, which is kind of tethering knowledge intergenerationally, right? We're passing along knowledge, we're creating knowledge structures that we are mutually enforcing and collaborating on. But in turn, it actually is it's quite competitive, quite sometimes unkind, as you said, very simply. And it's surprising because what would that knowledge look like and what would that culture feel like if we kept that ethos in front of us as we learn together? The classic example that I've always heard of is law school, where a lot of my law school friends say people would be hiding books and publications so that they would have advantages. And you think, man, that's so crazy. And I even felt some of that when I was in grad school for clinical psychology, where people were treacherous and manipulating. And it was
Yeah.
surprising because you wouldn't expect it in clinical psychology. And so it's interesting to see that that's your mission. And it seems like it kind of lifts the veil off of what higher education is. So I would love for us to maybe go a little bit more. Tell us about neoliberalism. How is it classically defined?
Yes, that's a great that's a big question. You use some words already that are good characteristics that maybe neoliberalism requires us to tap into. Like use the term self-preservation, competition, and I think it's easy for me to sort of demonize neoliberalism, but it's not anything we can escape. It's like the air we breathe. So we all sort of reproduce it. We all proliferate it, but it doesn't mean we have to all the time in all cases. But like you said, it's almost like we're beholden to it as far as we have to follow neoliberal norms for self-preservation in the academy or in student affairs, which is where but the definition is, and you'll want to edit this down, but I pulled up a couple ways that I describe it, but it's technically an economic term. That's so when I say the term neoliberalism, we're not talking about liberal as like a political party or affiliation. It's an economic affiliation, meaning as Western societies, we moved from classic liberalism to neoliberalism, where so new liberalism, the 70s, Reagan, Thatcher, and it's not just Republicans, it's everybody. So neoliberalism is basically the rules of the game of capitalism, and capitalism has been running the show for 400 years in our nation. But these rules of capitalism run on, and again, if you don't like economics, this might be boring, but it helps understand how it translates into everything else, is free markets, free enterprise, and hyper individualism. So let the markets decide, let people, supply and demand make the best decisions for what we need as societies. Markets, and so things like privatization can do things better than government. So things like privatization are part of neoliberalism as well. Free enterprises let businesses decide what's best for them and let them have free reign to do that. And hyper individualism is meaning for neoliberalism to work, we have to break up collectivism or break up society or community because it impedes like individual choice. Another way to say it is it prioritizes the bottom line over human flourishing. So, and it's that's what common sense is neoliberalism says the bottom line is the way to get to human flourishing. So let's not get in the way of hitting that bottom line, whatever that is in an institution and a business. Those rules of capitalism, though, have been translated into all of society. So now they're rules for how I develop my own self concept. I've sort of there's this term called homo economicus where we're self-entrepreneurial and we see if you look at our language there's so much of our language that's in economic terms. So these neoliberal concepts translate to the individual, they translate to how we run institutions and how we see society in general. And again, if remember, it's to the benefit of the bottom line and to the sort of deficit of the rest of our humanity for flourishing. Like, think of like Darwinism. This is not to get too broad here too, but a lot of the way we've learned about Darwinism and social Darwinism is survival of the fittest, which fits a neoliberal script. Is like whoever's strongest, fittest, best, that's who's going to get, that's what works. But part of Darwinism that we don't talk about is also survival of the kindest, which is we've had to rely on cooperation, care, and collaboration to survive as societies as well. But because of our neoliberal bent for so long in society, we have the dominant narrative is neoliberalism. I have one quote that might sum this up. If we can be persuaded to see ourselves simply as consumers, then all other relationships are reduced to one common denominator: the fact that we are consuming a product in a market which only has value because we pay for it. Everything becomes a commodity, and in this aspect of our lives overrides everything. In this whole new way of seeing society, a new way of thinking is developed, and it becomes the cornerstone for a new kind of neoliberal common sense.
It leaves me wondering about the scale of these things, right? I mean, when we're talking about survival of the fittest, it might be looking more individualistically, right? Which is clearly not
Yes,
how giant ecosystems work when humans definitely don't
yes,
live by themselves. We live in complex societies and groups. And I'm wondering again whether this kind narrative looks prospectively in a larger scale, right? What might have worked within a shorter scale when you're only taking care of the individual, does it fail on a larger scale? Does it collapse when we think about just the sustainability of these things, whether we're talking politically or using that example of the law student who hides papers so that other students suffer?
yes, yeah,
Does that person end up doing something that later jeopardizes their career, their law
right.
firm down the line? So whatever we're talking about, how does kindness really protect us in the long run? And whatever that
Yeah,
scale is, and especially as we're talking about education, what does that look like as we're kind of naturally peeling the layers of education? When we embrace this ethos of kindness, what does that ultimately do to education? How does it allow us to grow in a way that we haven't seen before?
that's a great question. Like, I think it's a both and. I think it's an ideal and I think it's a reality. And I think the reality of living in compassion and kindness and care for how we're interconnected happens all the time in microbursts and in different ways. It's just not the dominant way we function. So it's happening already. And I feel like we can use the ways it happens already to that we're sort of unwittingly living by neoliberalism and it's harmful for us. So there's the both and. There's the we live in it in the present and it's also a an ideal for sure. I think it's a hard ideal to live out. How the individual, that's what it was, is something that I look at a lot in my work and a lot of people look at, I think, in compassion work is individualism, collectivism. And I don't I think that's a false dichotomy. Like I think individual isn't this is gonna sound crazy, but I don't think there is such a thing in totality as a completely separate, discrete individual, separate from everything around them. We're born into contexts. We have people around us. We are relational and social people. And those things build who we are and how we function in the world and how we see the world. So, but neoliberalism relies on hyper individualism is what works for me, what benefits me is what's best in disconnection with there are other people around us that we impact. So, what I think is important to remember, even in a neoliberal society, is that what I do and how I function, what I write, how I treat the people around me is always interconnected. And my well-being is caught up in your well-being, even though like, and that sounds like a very big abstract idea. But when you break it down to even like an office in a university or to the workplace in the university, my well-being is certainly is interconnected with my students' well-being. Like if I am not doing well, taking care of myself, being compassionate to myself, how will I have the resources to be able to do that with my students and versa?
Is there any policy that you can point to as a classic example of where people are putting compassion as a central value?
What I have seen is, and this is part of the problem, is the policy is not ingrained in the system. So I always think of K-12 teachers, K through 12 education, because they have more policy mandates on what they do and how they roll than, say, somebody like me that's a career counselor. I have some policy mandates, but not a lot. And so, for instance, K through 12 education it has been, this might be changing right now. By the way, I'm speaking as a representative of myself and my doctoral work, not of my institution, University of Tampa. I have to say that right now. But especially in Florida, where I am, is we have these policies around social and emotional learning. I don't know if that's familiar to you, but it's called SEL. I'm guessing in your field, you know what this is. And these are policies that are meant to be compassionate and help students learn and develop their capacities for compassion, kindness, empathy. And those were mandated for the classroom. That would be a policy I would say it can be helpful. And then there's a lot of compassion work on how scientists are helping teachers learn how to develop and teach compassion, kindness, and empathy. But where the disconnect is the administration and the structures for running education are not implementing those so that there is kindness, compassion, and flourishing for teachers. So, like, teachers are required to teach about compassion, but the way their work life and what's required them is structured burns them out, is doesn't take into consideration their full humanity. For instance, I had a friend that wrote a dissertation on teacher bladder. Is it written into a teacher's daily schedule, there are not bathroom breaks. Like, you can't leave the classroom. So that's like it's known in K-12 education. Like, oh yeah, you don't go to the bathroom, you don't get a bathroom break. And so, how is that building compassion into a system where we're telling teachers to teach students compassion when they don't have a bathroom break? So policy, that question even is interesting to me because we have policies that are implemented sort of at more of an individualistic level, but they are not policies we follow or implement at a systemic level so that our work is sustainable and flourishing. Hope I did not go too tangential on you there, but
No, that's
yeah.
wonderful. That's wonderful. In 10, 20, 30 years,
Hmm.
how do you hope that it affects this field?
That's a great question. The three words that come to my mind, and it's really the focus of my work, so it's easy to have these three words, is illumination, disruption, and transformation. Meaning that people that like myself, like I currently work as a practitioner, I'm a career counselor and I'm a scholar, but that I am able to articulate, show, reveal, name neoliberal norms in our daily work. I think for me, even I study it, it's challenging because it is so common sense. Like it's just, again, the air we breathe. So I would hope to see in 5, 10 years from now that this has been illuminated on a large enough scale or even on small scales so that people then have a way to do something about it. So that's the second thing, is disruption. And disruption might sound violent, and I don't mean it that way. Illuminating and naming something is a form of disruption. I'm all about compassionate disruption. That's part of my thing, is compassion is two things, right? It's noticing the suffering of others, but the second part is the part that's really exciting for me, is then doing something about it, like, is doing something to relieve it. And for me, I hope that in 5 or 10 years, other people are taking real tangible steps in their work, and I have examples of this, to disrupt those compassionate norms, to then be able to transform them into something else, something that is not based in neoliberal norms, but is based in something that is more healing, freeing, and pro-social than neoliberalism. So again, it's still abstract, But as far as how our organizations would function, I think writ large, I don't know. I can only see it in the small, like I said, microbursts of ways that I see it now.
And is that susceptible to federal administration? Obviously, after this American election in 2024, a lot of higher education is fearful. When we're thinking about even how DEI is being attacked and dismantled, it obviously poses interesting questions to not just the practice of DEI, but even the theory. How are these ideas susceptible to administration changes? And if so, how do you guys adapt to that?
Yeah, I think that's a great timely question. It's already challenging to disrupt it. Let me start there. Like it's similar with DEI. Actually, neoliberalism and inequity, racial inequity, gender inequity, they're all tied together. They're all like sort of a bigger entanglement of massive harms in the world. But so to disrupt and to transform neoliberalism now is challenging. Like I work with people who cannot do presentations with me at my institution because to say the word neoliberal is risky for their political status. So that's like even before this administration. But your question about the administration and people in higher ed being fearful, absolutely. The way that I see this stuff happening now and continuing to happen is people continue to do the work in the ways that they can, but perhaps using different language, different words. And sometimes it's not as, what's the word, promoted. You're not seeing it. I'm not saying, hey, look at me doing this work over here. I'm more just doing my work on the daily in the places where I can make change in small or big ways. And again, I have examples of how that happens, but yes, I think it's challenging. I think administrations impact it, and I don't think it's impossible or hopeless to continue doing the work. It's just how to do it. And going back to self preservation, how do I do it in ways that take my own safety into account and what am I willing to risk and not risk? I think that's different for everybody.
Scholars like you are courageous because as I think about that, a lot of the work that other scientists are doing, it's not so charged in certain ways, socially charged or politically charged. There's this inherent tension between studying things that actually benefit systems and societies versus those who are in power undermining those efforts. So innately it does go back to this idea of self-preservation, which might be that neoliberal construct enforced, right? It's like,
Yeah.
yeah, we want to talk about dismantling these things, but in the process of dismantling these things, you might actually get attacked in some weird way or undermined by lose funding. Yeah. But it's interesting. And I always wonder about that. How does that work?
Yes, this is like, what would you call this? Raw for me. This is very salient. This is what I'm thinking about because for the past 5 years as a doctoral student, I've been working on disruptive topics. Side note, I think it's interesting too is like we talk about other like scientists and scholars doing work that's not as political, and maybe I'm preaching to the choir. I'm like, it is political, but it's the norm, so we don't think of it as political. Like it's the dominant narrative, so it feels neutral, but it's not. There's nothing that's neutral. But like you said, so then to reveal that is dangerous. So that's side note. Maybe I'm what's the word preaching. But yes, as far as like how we keep doing this work for healing and change and compassion, I think you said it like all the ways, any way that you can. For me, it's like how, and it might differ on the day and it might differ on this setting on it. Like for example, and it's very weird and compartmentalizing and dismembering of our humanity because I'm not speaking on behalf of the University of Tampa right now because I'm not protected by academic freedom. I am not a faculty member. I'm a staff member, and so I can't just say what I want without risk of losing my job. But as a doctoral student at the University of South Florida, I still have academic freedom protections, which is why that's and so important. So I'm going to keep writing what I'm writing. At least for now, I can keep writing what I'm writing. And so for me, that's how I can continue to do the work is under those protections of academic freedom. But so that's one way. But I think everybody does this differently. Like some people are going to be able to function and be able to withstand the pressure by, like you said, renaming things, using different words. Like for me, that's really hard because I'm like, what? Yeah. but I'm not other people, and they have to make choices for what works for them too. If there's enough people, and I do think there are enough people, I don't know how it will look or what it will look like, but I think there are enough people pushing back, even with like joking and humorous memes on social media. I'm like, this might save us. Like just having a sense of humor about things. And then I think back to like history, movements of marginalized folks, indigenous populations and Black people in the United States. Like they've lived this way for a long time. And so for me, I do reading with people who have like, this isn't new for them. And how have they collectively resisted? How have they collectively moved forward in um, joy and in hope as well? But to be honest, like my big answer is I don't know. I'm trying something different every day and just trying to continue to do the work that I do in ways that make sense for me. I don't know if that's a cop out or what. It's just I'm figuring it out as I go.
Well, it almost ties back to your first point that you brought up in the first part of the interview, which is as a career counselor, you're kind of doing things that make you feel alive. And so again,
Yeah.
you might be the person tasked for this specific question. And I'm sure this will be a lifelong study. And so through the
Cool.
fruits of your labor, we will understand this better. And whether you're doing it and you're mapping it out, or maybe you're in the future you have doctoral students who are doing this, or you're
Yeah.
teaching undergraduate classes,
Yeah.
or you just give one scholar the idea that then proliferates. The idea is these things have an intellectual foothold. And so that's beautiful that you are mapping this out. Again, for me, I've never really thought too deeply on these issues. And I'm sure our community at the Global Compassion Coalition haven't thought too deeply about these things. So it's wonderful for you to be teaching us about it. So we really appreciate that.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. I hope like I've been so enriched and emboldened by other people's scholarly works that not just scholarly, but their practice too, but people reading and writing about things that I've found myself in. And yes, I hope that in some small way, that's what I can do for my students, for the larger academic community, and for higher ed in general, is provide something that is fruitful, and helps make people come alive.
Wonderful. And my last question involves your role with the Global Compassion Coalition. What
Yeah.
committees are you involved with, or what are you currently doing?
So I am on like a pause right now. I was part of one of the founding or original members of the education working group or the education cluster. So this was a group of mostly scholars and a few practitioners looking at basically pre-K through higher ed. And our group was mostly consisting of US and people from the UK. And most of them studying compassion, like they are compassion scientists in those settings. And myself and one other person were a little bit of outliers, not in a bad way. Of we were looking at we've been talking about. What are some of the bigger social, political, philosophical norms that stifle this work, that get in the way of this work, or that keep it from flourishing? So I was on that education working group, and we were really trying to help equip, and they still exist, and they're on the website. They're trying to equip teachers and educators to implement compassion and compassionate interventions with their students and teach their students compassion as well. So, and I'm kind of interested in the how do we do that for people that work in education and higher education. So I've been in part of that working group, and then I'm on like a list of like scholarly references, and then I've done like a YouTube live panel on what's compassionate education. So it's been a treat because I'm working full time, I have a family, I'm getting my doctorate. Not a sustainable way to live long term, but I took a little bit of a break because I'm writing my dissertation right now, and then I'm hoping to come back to serving on that education group.
Well, that sounds so wonderful. And we really appreciate your work with the GCC. And thank you so much, Rachel, for your time today. It was lovely to learn about your work, and we certainly look forward to hearing how it develops over time.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity and for doing what you do. And I just love that there's a global compassion coalition, and that I get to be a part of it. So thanks for advancing this work as well.
I really appreciate it. So thank you so much. Thank you for joining us. This episode was produced by the Global Compassion Coalition and hosted by Michael Jubrick, recorded in 2025. Original music by Guy James. Find our links in the show notes. Thanks for listening.